I never expected their laughter to echo like gunshots. But when Marissa and the others called me the charity case, something inside me snapped. I turned slowly, feeling their eyes on my back as I walked over to my battered Toyota parked at the end of the cul-de-sac, my heart hammering like a war drum. I reached into the passenger seat and pulled out an old, scuffed leather portfolio, the one I'd discovered in my grandmother's attic just a month ago, hidden behind moth-eaten quilts and faded photographs. Inside was the proof I needed, the piece of paper stamped and signed, the chain of title tracing back generations, certifying me as the rightful owner of every house on this street. Their mouths fell open before I could even clear my throat. My voice trembled at first, but I rallied, drawing in a breath as sharp and cold as winter air. You think I'm charity, huh? You think I owe everything to some government handout, or to your pity? I let the question hang in the thick afternoon light. I could see their smug smirks fade into confusion. My fingertips brushed the edge of the deed, and I leaned forward, pinning each of them with my gaze, letting them anticipate what was coming. Well, I have something better than your pity, I said. I have the deed to your houses. The words hit them like a freight train. In the sudden silence, the only sound was the distant chirp of cicadas and the soft hum of passing cars. I remember that morning, curled up on my grandmother's old wicker porch swing, sifting through dusty boxes that smelled of lavender sachets. And time gone by. My grandma had always been secretive about our family history, especially about that sprawling network of properties scattered across town, homes I'd always assumed belonged to some distant relative I'd never met. She died with barely a warning, leaving behind a half-smile and a handful of letters I never had the chance to read. It wasn't until the lawyer called me 2 weeks later, voice tight and professional, that I learned of my inheritance, every parcel of land she owned, each house she'd rented out, every duplex and triplex in her portfolio, hers legally and unquestioned. I felt a strange mix of grief and exhilaration. Suddenly, my life of loans, food stamps, and second-hand clothes threatened to flip upside down over the next few days. I holed up in a dusty real estate office downtown, pulling title insurance and checking the zoning codes on my phone. I printed copies of tax records that showed decades of quiet rental income I'd never known existed. I found the corporate entity Grandma had set up to manage it all, Evelyn Harper Holdings, and realized I'd been its sole shareholder for years, completely oblivious. At first, it was surreal. I'd scraped by on minimum wage, rented a tiny room in a run-down apartment building, convinced everyone I was a charity case through and through. My life had been a series of hand-me-downs and borrowing schemes, always just a paycheck away from being out on the street. Now I had equity, real tangible wealth, and I realized I could change everything. Last night, I printed out the deed, notarized and ready. I slipped it into my leather portfolio and lay awake, imagining the faces of the people who'd sneered at me since childhood. Marissa, who'd teased me mercilessly about my worn-out shoes. Tyler, who'd mocked my accent and my family's origins. Even quiet Mrs. Linden at number 14, who faked sympathy every time she handed me a casserole dish full of lasagna. They all thought they held power over me, their white picket fences, their manicured lawns, their perfect lives built on generational privilege. But they didn't know the truth. They didn't know they were living on my property. This afternoon, I texted them, "Meet me at the cul-de-sac at 1. No explanation, just the time and the place. I could feel the weight of their curiosity, of their expectation that it would be another sad story, another sob story for them to pity. When they showed up in their SUVs and sedans, dressed in designer labels and carrying iced lattes, I waited until the last one stepped out before I closed my car door. They formed a half circle around me, eyes wide, arms crossed. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and something metallic, like anticipation. I took a step forward and flipped open the portfolio, revealing the crisp document. Marissa's face paled. Tyler's jaw slackened. Mrs. Linden pressed a hand to her chest as if to still her heartbeat. I watched them for a moment, letting the shock settle in. And then I spoke, voice low, calm but reverberating with something none of them had ever heard before. "This is the deed to your houses," I said. "Every single one of them. You've been living in my inheritance." I lifted the papers higher so the afternoon sun glinted off the seal. Grandma never trusted banks or lawyers. She trusted family, and she made sure everything reverted to me if I ever needed it. My chest tightened as I said it, because the truth was, I needed it. I needed a way out of the cycle I'd been trapped in, the cycle that kept me thinking I was worthless. Tyler swallowed hard. "You can't do that," he said, voice shaking. "We've been here for 20 years. He glanced at the deed, then back at me, hoping for some loophole, some excuse. But I shook my head. "You never bought those houses. You just lived here, paid grandmother rent every month, sometimes late, sometimes never. That rent went into a trust. Now that she's gone, I'm the beneficiary." I closed the portfolio with a soft snap and tucked it under my arm. "You have 60 days to vacate. Better find a new place to live when you actually own." They looked at each other, panic and embarrassment blooming on their faces like venomous flowers. I could almost taste their regret. As I turned to walk away, I heard Mrs. Linden call my name, voice thin and pleading, but I didn't look back. My heart pounded, and I felt a rush of something fierce and triumphant that I'd never allowed myself to feel before. Vindication. I climbed into my Toyota, slammed the door, and started the engine, the murmurs of my former neighbors following me down the street. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't even know what I'd do with all that money. But for the first time in my life, I knew I had the power, and that knowledge was more intoxicating than anything I'd ever experienced. I drive away from the cul-de-sac with my heart pounding so hard I can taste it in my mouth. The late afternoon sun slants through my windshield as I pass a row of empty driveways that only moments ago belonged to Marissa, Tyler, Mrs. Linden, and the rest. My hands tighten on the steering wheel. I feel unsteady, as if the ground beneath me has shifted, tilting the world sideways. All my life I've lived with the fear that any day the rug would be pulled out from under me. But today, I'm the one pulling it out from under them. I head toward my grandmother's old office building downtown, planning to drop off copies of the deed at the county recorder's office. I need to make everything official before anyone can contest it. By the time I park in the cracked asphalt lot behind the brick-faced building, a nervous energy courses through me. My Toyota's engine idles as if it knows I'm about to sprint inside. I clutch the portfolio to my chest and step onto the sidewalk, adjusting my jacket against a sudden breeze. The building looms over me, its windows dusty from decades of neglect. Inside, the smell of old paper and polished wood greets me like an old friend. I approach the front desk, heart hammering, and lay out the deed along with photocopies. The clerk barely glances up at first, her eyes scanning my documents. When she finally meets my gaze, she nods curtly and stamps each page with a heavy thud that echoes in the quiet room. My stomach clenches with anticipation as I sign affidavits and pay the processing fees I barely have in my bank account. Every signature and seal cements my claim, turning my grandmother's carefully tended secret into public record. I leave the recorder's office with certified copies in hand and a new sense of purpose settling into my bones. My next stop is the local coffee shop where I've been hiding out these past weeks, dodging calls from curious relatives and nosy neighbors. I order a black coffee and sit in the corner booth, pulling up my phone to send emails to a real estate attorney I found online. I explain the situation in clipped sentences. Inherited properties, tenants unaware of the change, immediate legal action required. I attach scanned copies of the deed and wait for a response. While I wait, I let my mind wander back to childhood Sunday mornings in my grandmother's living room, the scent of her cinnamon rolls drifting through the air as she recounted family lore. She never boasted about her assets, never hinted at the legacy she was building. She simply smiled, her eyes full of secrets she never needed to share until now. My phone buzzes with the attorney's reply. She's available for a brief consultation today if I can meet her at her office in 2 hours. I glance at the clock. There's just enough time to grab lunch and steel myself for what comes next. I head back out onto the street, passing a pawn shop and a row of boarded-up storefronts. My mind races with possibilities. Should I offer to Sell or lease some properties? Should I reach out to tenants with a gesture of goodwill, or maintain a firm stance to avoid any hint of weakness? I remind myself that I owe no favors to anyone who mocked me, but a small voice whispers that I don't want to become the villain in this story. I pause at a crosswalk, watching a mother wrangle two kids in matching rain boots. Their laughter bubbles up around me, and I feel a pang of something I haven't felt since before my grandmother died. Hesitation. The attorney's office is nestled in a renovated warehouse down by the river, the kind of place with exposed brick walls and vinyl couches. I enter and find her behind a large mahogany desk, her salt and pepper hair pulled back into a tight bun. She greets me with a firm handshake and ushers me into a leather chair. We talk for an hour as she outlines the legal steps the tenants might take: temporary restraining orders, claims of estoppel, challenges to the validity of the trust. She warns me that despite the clarity of the deed, they could drag this out in court for months, maybe years. I feel my chest tighten at the thought of endless litigation. She suggests a preemptive letter to each tenant, laying out my rights and offering a 30-day lease termination agreement in exchange for a pledge to vacate without legal wrangling. I nod, scribbling notes furiously. As I leave, she slips me a business card and reminds me to stay calm, to avoid any emotional confrontations. I tuck the card into my pocket like a talisman against panic. Back at my grandmother's old apartment, I spread out the certified copies of the deed on the kitchen table under the flickering fluorescent light. I draft the letters to my neighbors, knowing it will hurt them more to see my offer of a smooth exit than to face sudden homelessness. My hand trembles as I sign my name at the bottom of each page. I fold them neatly into envelopes and address them to each house on the cul-de-sac. In the morning, I'll mail them first class and wait for the backlash. I feel a swirl of guilt and exhilaration mixing inside me. Guilt because I'm appending lives, exhilaration because I'm finally in control of mine. That night, sleep eludes me. I lie on my grandmother's sagging sofa, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the day. I ask myself if I've become the kind of person who wields power without mercy. I remember Grandma's voice, soft and confident. Family looks out for family. I realize my authority doesn't have to be ruthless. I can set boundaries without cruelty, but only if I allow myself the space to feel compassion. As dawn breaks, I rise with a resolve. I will stand firm, but I will not become the monster they expected me to be. Tomorrow, I will send the letters and brace for their reactions. I don't know what will happen next, whether they'll fight or flee, whether I'll broker peace or watch everything burn down, but I know I'm ready to face it. And with that, I step out into the pale morning light, clutching the stack of envelopes that will change our lives forever. I wake before dawn, stomach knotting at the thought of what today will bring. The envelopes rest on my kitchen counter, each one bearing the tenants' names and my carefully drafted letter. I pour a cup of black coffee and load the stack into a canvas tote, my fingers brushing the crisp edges as I step out into the pale morning light. The street is silent, save for the soft hum of my Toyota's engine as I pull up to the mailbox. With each letter I drop through the slot, I imagine the shock and anger that will follow. My heart pounds, but beneath the fear there is a steady calm. I have done everything by the book. By late morning, my phone floods with messages. Marissa's text comes first. "What the hell, Evelyn? You can't do this." Then Tyler's angry voicemail. "You'll hear from my lawyer. Prepare to lose everything." Mrs. Linden sends a tearful email, begging for more time, reminding me she baked me those lasagnas all those years. I sit at my grandmother's kitchen table, reading and rereading their pleas and threats. Part of me wants to respond with cold formality, but another part hesitates, remembering Grandma's gentle voice. Power tempered with kindness is its own reward. I close my eyes, take a breath, and begin drafting reply letters that acknowledge their distress while standing firm on the 60-day deadline. The next day, I receive notice that Tyler has filed for a temporary restraining order, claiming undue hardship and emotional distress. I feel a cold spike of panic, but I still myself and call my attorney, who assures me the restraining order is unlikely to hold. They have no legal grounds to challenge clear title. We prepare for a hearing at the county courthouse in 2 days. I spend that time gathering packing supplies, researching local housing options, and drafting a brief outline of my grandmother's trust provisions to present as evidence. Late at night, I practice my testimony in front of the bathroom mirror, voice trembling at first but growing stronger with each repetition. On the morning of the hearing, the courthouse feels cavernous and judgmental, its marble halls echoing with shuffling feet and hushed conversations. I sit in a hard wooden chair, clutching my leather portfolio, as Tyler and Marissa glare at me across the aisle. Mrs. Linden hovers behind us, her eyes red-rimmed with worry. When the judge calls the case, I rise and speak calmly, presenting the notarized deed, the trust documents, and the recorder's office certifications. I explain my grandmother's intentions, her meticulous record-keeping, and my willingness to help with relocation costs. The judge listens, nods, and grants my motion to dismiss the restraining order. My relief floods me like warm sunlight through a clouded sky. As we leave the courtroom, Tyler's shoulders slump in defeat. Marissa avoids my gaze, and Mrs. Linden's shoulders shake with silent sobs. Suddenly, an older man steps forward, Mr. Delgado, a neighbor from the end of the street who had been quietly watching the case. He clears his throat and tells me that their family was never wealthy, that the rent they paid to Grandma had gone unnoticed into the trust, but that Grandma always intended for someone responsible to manage her properties and, if possible, use them to benefit the community. He produces a faded letter he found taped under his staircase, written in Grandma's looping script, stating her wish to open a community center in the old carriage house behind my grandmother's home. My heartbeat skips as I unfold the yellowed paper. She had envisioned a place for after-school programs, a shelter in winter, a hub for neighbors to gather and support one another. I read her words aloud, voice catching with emotion. She wanted her legacy to extend beyond bricks and mortar, to foster connection and dignity. Marissa's eyes fill with tears. Tyler grips his wife's hand, and Mrs. Linden breathes a shaky sigh. In that moment, the tension that had crackled between us transforms into something fragile and hopeful. I realize that Grandma never saw us as adversaries but as future stewards of her vision. Later that afternoon, I convene a meeting in the old carriage house, its dusty rafters echoing with possibility. I lay out Grandma's letter and propose a plan. We will allocate one house for a community center rent-free and offer relocation assistance or favorable purchase terms on the remaining properties. The tenants exchange glances, the anger and fear giving way to curiosity. I outline a timeline: 60 days to select their new paths, 6 months to establish the center, and 1 year for me to transfer management of the nonprofit entity we will form together. Their faces reflect cautious hope, the same flicker that had once drawn me to Grandma's stories. Over the next few weeks, I work side by side with Marissa as she coordinates with local charities, while Tyler negotiates with a small investor interested in purchasing one of the duplexes. Mrs. Linden volunteers to bake treats for fundraising events. We draft bylaws for the center and file paperwork to secure nonprofit status. Every step feels surreal. Once we were adversaries. Now we are collaborators, united by Grandma's legacy and by our shared desire for community. The carriage house transforms under our hands. Fresh paint, second-hand furniture, shelves stocked with books and board games. Laughter echoes through its hallways, and I catch myself smiling more often than I have in years. On the day we cut the ribbon, the entire neighborhood gathers around the carriage house steps. The mayor gives a brief speech, children chase each other across the lawn, and the smell of Mrs. Linden's cinnamon rolls drifts through the air. I stand beside Marissa, Tyler, and Mr. Delgado, feeling the weight of Grandma's presence as if she's smiling down on us. I step up to the microphone and speak from the heart, thanking everyone for believing in the vision she left behind. As I finish, the applause washes over me, and I realize that I have found my true inheritance, not just the properties and their value, but the power to bring people together, to turn suspicion into solidarity. That evening, I returned to Grandma's old apartment, now neatly painted and ready for its next life as the center's administrative office. I find a hidden drawer in her old desk containing one last letter addressed to me. My hands tremble as I open it and read her final words. You were always more than a charity case. You are my legacy and my pride. Use this gift wisely. With compassion and courage, tears fill my eyes as I fold the letter and place it next to her photograph on the mantel. I sit quietly, reflecting on how far I've come from the girl who believed she was nothing to the woman who realized she could change the world around her. And in that moment, I know that Grandma's faith in me was the greatest deed of all.